Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of All in the Mishpacha. Here you can see the famous Shavuos edition of All in the Mishpacha. From the mountain to the people, Rav Uri Deutsch shares Shavuos insight and inspiration. And yes, I will be focusing on this discussion. They asked this rabbi, here's a picture of him over here. That's Rabbi Uri Deutsch. Who is Rabbi Uri Deutsch? It says in the next page, he is the much beloved Mara Asra of Lakewood's Forest Park community. He's a rabbi in Lakewood, New Jersey. And they decided to ask him some questions that were relevant to learning Torah, because it is, after all, the holiday of Shavuos. Learning Torah is very important. And there's some very pressing questions that people need to know about, and they actually had a lot of good questions over here. I want to focus on one of the questions that they asked over here, and the question is as follows. We asked, moving along, the years in Kollel afford a magnificent opportunity to grow in learning and truly become a Talmid Chacham. The Yetzer Hara is aware of this and brandishes some of his most lethal weapons to make sure it doesn't happen. Let's start with a very basic challenge, gaining a sense of direction. In yeshivas, there's a structured pattern of growth. 9th grade leads to 10th grade, which then leads to 11th. There's a clearly defined beginning, middle, and end. Kollel is not like that. It can, in many cases, should, ideally, run ad infinitum. But human beings don't respond well to journeys with no destination. They need an outline goal which they can work to achieve. How does one implement that purpose into Kollel style learning? Question is, it's a very fundamental question. What do you learn when you go to Kollel? Now, there's a lot of Kollelim out there. Some want you to learn a specific thing. Most Kollelim are like that, especially if you want to get paid. The more the Kollel is offering, usually the Rosh Kollel, or whoever's in charge, wants you to be learning whatever they're learning, a certain thing. That's not always the case. Like if you go to Yeshiva's Mir, where you get a paltry sum, like 1,000 shekel, which is close to like $300, which also Beis Medrash Gavoa, I think, pays around the same thing. Or maybe they upped it to $1,000, which is basically the same thing as 1,000 shekel here in Israel. You can basically do mashalibo chafetz, whatever you want. There's so many different choices in the Mir Yeshiva, different types of chaburas to join. You can learn yourself. You can learn with chabura. Which one do you choose? How do you know what to choose? So I'll tell you what he answers, and then I'll tell you my thoughts on this question, because I have some very interesting insight based on something that I just realized about myself, and going back 20 years, a message I got from my Rosh Hashiva 20 years ago, and how I relate to it now, 20 years later. He basically says, success in Kollel years requires one to recognize the contribution that Tzibur has to his development, while at the same time coming to realize his role as an individual. To translate into Kollel terms, the group, the Tzibur, creates a strong environment of learning and gives a basic structure of development. That's why it's an important part of Kollel. But ultimately, becoming a Talmid Chacham is the ability of a person to clearly define what he wants his personal agenda learning to be. My Rosh Chabura added, what distinguishes the one who succeeds in climbing the higher rungs in Torah from those who don't is two things: their clarity in what they want when they reach for their V'sein Chalkeinu B'sar Asacha, and a single-minded dedication and focus in achieving that goal. To be successful in Kollel, one must relentlessly pursue goals that he's established for himself. And what those goals are will depend on what your V'sein Chalkeinu B'sar Asacha is, along with the cognizant there are no two that are the same. Kollel fulfills the ideal of learning with a group, as we are taught. Saying Ein Torah Niknes Ela B'Chabura, the rigor and structure of the Kollel setting contribute to one's motivation, but ultimately it is the recognition and focus on one's own abilities and aspirations that will guide him toward reaching great achievements in learning. So basically he says, I think, three things over here. Number one, it's important to be part of a Kollel group. Don't just be by yourself. Number two, even in that group, you have to clearly define what do you want to learn, where do you want to achieve. And then number three is dedication to achieving that goal, and basically the diligence that you have in trying to succeed in what you outlined. So those three things. Most people are not successful in doing all three of those things. Most people end up learning in a group. But the problem is that most of the Kollels tell you what you have to learn, so you can't really outline what you think you should be learning, and certainly you can't fulfill what you think if you're not able to learn what you want to learn. Now, there are some people that learn in the mirror or different Kollels that allow them the flexibility of learning what they think is the best for them. Out of those people, some will succeed in fulfilling what they outlined as they outlined that they wanted to accomplish, and some won't, depending on their dedication, depending also on their financial situation, their family situation. There's a lot of other factors that go into it. But he doesn't give clarification on what you should be outlining your focus on. I would like to say as follows. He gives a very ambiguous answer, very unclear answer. I think really, ideally, that it's not just in Kollel. I think yeshiva curriculum. I think, a lot of boys, even if they're in yeshiva ktana, they're in high school, in yeshivish high school, they're learning Masechtas, learning Gemara. A person really doesn't come to develop his own learning style until he's about 18 years old. I would say yeshiva gdola, or he graduates from the high school, he's in yeshiva gdola. That's when a person really puts his own focus and he sets his own goals for his achievement in learning. And I think the problem is that that should be implemented, I think, for 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 years, to learn under a Rebbe, to learn a Masechta very slow. Maybe you start yeshivish Masechta, and learn Be'in, learn how to learn a skill, analytics Be'in, which is very important in learning. I learned for many years Be'in, trying to develop my own style of analytical approach. You can learn, there's so many different Rebbeim to learn from. I had the privilege of learning from Rabbi Yonasan Sachs in Yeshiva University. First, Rabbi Yochum Koningsberg in Yeshiva University, and Rabbi Yonasan Sachs. I gained something interesting from both of those Rebbeim. Yonasan Sachs was more, Shas-wide. He gave you a lot of yedios, a lot of knowledge of different machlokesim, different machlokas rishonim, machlokas in the Gemara, all throughout Shas. And Rabbi Yochum Koningsberg helped me develop the start of analytical, basically telling you the two basic sides in every way of analyzing something, which is very important. And then the rest of my years I spent learning by Rabbi Yaakov Friedman in Beitar. He's currently in Beitar. I was then in Har Nof. He went even deeper. His analytics was basically a two-hour shiur, twice a week, where he basically was a building on what I've learned from Yochum Koningsberg, to analyze it basically to the end. And it was very important to listen to all those shiurim. I gained a lot from all those shiurim. And my approach nowadays is not like any of them. It's a combination of all three, really. But that's really where I got the Derech HaLimud, the way I learned. But that's important. I basically left Rabbi Yaakov Friedman this year when I was about 24. So I had, about 5 or 6 years of serious learning. And I think that's not, an exaggeration. 5 or 6 years actually could be worthwhile. But Kollel usually extends at least here in Israel, maybe to the 30s. Some people 35, 40. Some people learn in Kollel their whole lives. Some people are learning their whole lives. Other people will graduate and become Rosh Yeshiva, Rosh Kollel, Rebbeim. Learning never stops. And I think there has to be a point where the analytics stop. Some people would rather learn in yeshivish style basically their entire lives. They would rather learn yeshivish style, learning analytically their entire lives. Some people, got the impression from their yeshivas that it's not really called learning if you don't learn Be'in, which I think is a big mistake. I really believe that after you're done picking up a way of learning analytically, you developed your mind to think analytically, I really feel that Rav Meir Shapiro was right. Daf Yomi is not something that's just for Balabatim. It's not considered a weakness to learn Daf Yomi. It's so important. I think Daf Yomi should be the standard for most Kollelim, and even for certain yeshivas, after 3 or 4 or 5 years of learning analytically, or even while you're learning analytically, maybe second Seder or night Seder to learn Daf Yomi, to set aside a couple hours a day to learn Daf Yomi. It's not that hard to learn Daf Yomi, if you just learn it on a superficial level. The Gemara says in many places, Rav Kahana says, when I was 18 years old, he knew the entire Shas, the Gemara in Shabbos says. And he says it's very important to learn Shas first, and then Aspare, first Agmore, first you learn the entire Shas, and then you can give Sfard. It's very hard to analyze something intellectually if you don't have all the sources in front of you. And the only way to have all the sources in front of you is to somehow go through all of Shas. And even Daf Yomi, which is breakneck speed, basically takes you 7.5 years. So I think you should start as early as possible. If you could start at 22, 23, finish Shas by you're 30 years old, maybe even do it a second time to refresh it in your memory. Go through Shas and have that in your back pocket so you can apply the analytics properly to investigate something, to analyze something with a method of Rav Chaim Brisker or any one of the Achronim or any analytical approach without knowing the full details, the scope of the entire Shas. It's basically, you're making a lot of mistakes because you don't know certain facts. And it's very sad. But I'd like to add something even deeper. 20 years ago, I was 21 years old. I had just finished learning Yeshivas Mir. I transferred to Rav Yaakov Friedman's yeshiva in Har Nof, it was then. And when I was in Yeshivas Mir, I come to Yeshivas Mir after learning Yeshiva University, where I picked up different approaches. Obviously, I wasn't able to learn full time there because I got a degree in a BA in college. But after college, I went to the Mir Yeshiva. It was a totally new perspective. Definitely opened my eyes in terms of Judaism, in terms of my commitment to Judaism, and my commitment to learning, to see types of people. It's a different type of people. In Yeshiva University, basically, even if you're going to remain in learning, it's towards a goal of becoming a rabbi or becoming a Rosh Yeshiva or something, a Rebbe in Yeshiva. There's a goal of getting some sort of job or some sort of placement with that learning, as opposed to the mere people just learning indefinitely for the sake of learning, which is a nice aspect to see. And I had gotten into learning halacha very much. I didn't know the halachas very much. I think that's very important. Besides just knowing Shas, or at least going through Shas, it's very important to know the halachas, because the highest level of Torah learning, right? Even the Gemara says that Talmud is greater than actually observing the mitzvahs. Why? Because Talmud may be like Maisa. Learning the Torah will help you do more Maisa, will help you do the mitzvahs better. If you're not someone who's actively learning Torah, you're going to stop doing the mitzvahs after a while. But if you're always engaged in learning Torah, you'll always be able to fulfill the mitzvahs. But the point of learning Torah is to do the mitzvahs, and the way we do the mitzvahs is outlined in the Shulchan Aruch. That's, and the Mishnah Berurah is considered according to a lot of people, the Posek Achron. So basically, if it says it in the Mishnah Berurah, basically you can follow that, you can rely on that, as opposed to other poskim when they have a machlokes. Maybe you should have a rabbi. You could ask a rebbe. You could ask for guidance, what the correct halacha, what you should be following. But halacha is so important, and I really got into learning halacha at that point. And I was learning in the morning. We're learning Maseches Nedarim at that point. And I would start my day, after breakfast. It was 9:10, 9:30. I would open up Mishnah Berurah. I was doing Chelik Aleph, and I would just go through it for an hour, hour and a half. And it felt so good. I really enjoyed learning the halachas. I was flying through it, And that was towards the end. I was in the Mir for 6 months. That was the last month in the Mir. I got into it. Then I transferred to Yaakov Friedman's yeshiva, and I wanted to continue doing it. Even I was in Yom Kippur that year. I went Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I was in the Mir. I davened in the yeshiva over there. I remember in Tfilas Ne'ilah, I made a neder. We were learning Maseches Nedarim. I made a neder to Hashem, because you're allowed. Nidrei mitzvah are allowed. They're even encouraged that I'm going to finish the next year Chelik Beis of the Mishnah Berurah, which I thought I'd be able to finish in 6 months, maybe 3 months at the pace that I was going. I made a neder to God that I was going to do that in the middle of Ne'ilah. It's pretty crazy, but I transferred to Yaakov Friedman's yeshiva, and I started learning Mishnah Berurah in the morning, Chelik Beis, and he came over to me, he saw me learning it. It was past 10 o'clock, and he said, "You can't learn that over here. You have to learn the Gemara." They learn in his yeshiva a very specific style. Everyone learns the same daf, and the entire day you learn one amud the entire day. The next day you go the next amud, but it's 3 sidarim of the same amud. And he was unhappy that I was learning Mishnah Berurah during that time. So I explained myself. I said, I'm really into this. And I went back to him 1 or 2 or 3 times, and he kept on telling me, no, you can't do it in the yeshiva. And what was I to do? It was his yeshiva. He was letting me be there. And I had no choice but to acquiesce. And I stopped learning Mishnah Berurah, and I had to be mater neder. I asked him what to do. I was mater the neder that I made. And it was unforeseen circumstances. But it still really bothered me. I was really into that, learning the Shulchan Aruch, as you should be, because when you learn Shulchan Aruch, you really get a grasp of what the halachas are, and there's no more relevant halachas than Aruch Chaim, Chelik Aleph, Chelik Beis, Chelik Gimel, So I give a shir now on Shulchan Aruch Yomi, and it was very hard for me because I had to learn 3 Siddharim of the Gemara, and I want to learn halacha, and you really don't get a kinyan, you don't really acquire the halacha unless you learn for like an hour at a time, and I can only learn Be'ena Siddharim, which is a half an hour, 45 minutes at a time. It really slowed me down. Eventually, I made it up. I learned most of Orach Chaim over the years, but he told me that come back to me in 5 years and you'll understand. And after 5 years, I still didn't understand. Now it's 20 years later. I was 21 years old. Now I'm 41 years old. And I finally have an understanding because I give a shir. I give 6 shiurim on the average day. I give a Gemara shir Daf Yomi. I give an Ian on the Daf Yomi shir, a Mishnah Yomi shir, which is the cycle of the Mishnah Yomi, an Ian on the Mishnah Yomi shir. And I started my own cycle of Shulchan Aruch Yomi, or hopefully I'll be completing about 6 years, which is 5 days a week, where I do 1 simon a day, whether it's short or whether it's long. On the days when it's longer, it's really difficult. But I do Shulchan Aruch Yomi. I also give an Ian shir on the Shulchan Aruch Yomi. One of the halachas is basically how I would see it. Of course, I'm not a rabbi. I'm not here to paskin, but I can still give you my own perspective on what I believe the halacha should be. So I do that, and I used to, because ever since then, when Rachel Friedman told me to learn Gemara first, I was always learning Gemara first in the morning. I guess I got to like it after a while, but I realized when I'm giving all the shiurim that after I gave the Gemara shir, which is the hardest shir to give, the Mishnah Yomi shir, I felt like it was like a burden to give, and in the afternoon I would do Shulchan Aruch Yomi as a burden, and I realized that I have to go back to what I really like to learn, and what I really like to learn is the Mishnayos, which is basically the halachas. It's basically very short halachas. It's obviously not the halacha l'maaseh. That's what we have the Shulchan Aruch for, but those 2 things should have precedence. I like those things better than learning Gemara. I realize this after 20 years. I still like those things. Just like I liked it 20 years ago, I still like those things. I didn't do it because that's just the way life took me. But I'm going back to the way and do Mishnah Yomi and Shulchan Aruch Yomi in the morning. I did it today like that, and obviously I enjoy it much more. And I can give more focus to the Shulchan Aruch Yomi, which is more important. And I'll tell you, I believe also a lot of people have problems with retaining their Gemara, retention of the Gemara. And I think one of the main reasons that people have difficulty retaining the Gemara that they learn is because it's not founded in halacha, right? If something goes back, every Gemara you learn has practical ramifications, it sticks in your mind a lot better than if you're learning some Maseches Gittin we're learning right now, and you're arguing about Fani Nechtam, Fani Nechtam. What the Svara is, or like Rabba, or like Rava. Is it because of Lishma? Is it because of Kiyum Shtaros? If you don't learn the Shulchan Aruch, I didn't get to this in Shulchan Aruch. You only learn Hilchos Gittin over there, but once I get there, I'll have relevance. If I do that, I give precedence to that, and the halacha is the most important thing. It changes your perspective on the Gemara. Also, when you give the Ian shir on the Gemara, you're going to give it more halacha focused, which I think people are more interested in anyway. The average person is more interested in how is it relevant to me? The Kollels talks about, he says, it could be some people, they can spend 30 years talking about the chakiros, investigations, analytics, and Maseches Gittin, and they forget about Cheshbon HaNefesh for 30 years. That's what the Mesilas Yesharim also says this. This is what we're spending our time on, learning Be'in for 30 years, when we have far more important things to think about. Part of Cheshbon HaNefesh is doing the right thing, and the only way to do the right thing in Judaism when it comes to the halachas of Judaism is knowing the Shulchan Aruch. The Mishnayos is a gateway, is a background of the basic halachas, so I think Mishnayos are very important also. My favorite thing to learn is Mishnayos. My second favorite thing is Shulchan Aruch Yomi. I believe, and third favorite is the Gemara, because Gemara is not as relevant nowadays. Even though I enjoy analytics, I like analyzing things. I like the intellectual pursuit, but it has to be grounded in halakha. It has to be grounded, and I think for anyone learning in Kollel, back to the question over here that was posed to this rabbi, I think if you're entering Kollel, it's important to join a Kollel where they're learning halakha. Now, the problem is that even the Kollim that learn halakha, they learn very, very slow. They can learn, let's say, Hilchos Bishul, in 4 or 5 months, learning 1 siman in Shulchan Aruch. I'm going to do that in 1 day, Hilchos Bishul. So I think just like in Daf Yomi, it's very important to learn the Gemara at a breakneck speed. There's so much to cover in Shulchan Aruch Yomi and Mishnah Yomi. You got to do it with the cycles. Go with Mishnah Yomi cycle, which was not created by me, and my cycle of Shulchan Aruch Yomi, where you're going through basically the entire scope of halacha in 6 years. That's the only way to do it. 6 years is a long time, but imagine you do it very slow, you'll never finish. Even in the yeshiva I was in, Rabbi Freeman's yeshiva, I think one of the goals was to do it very fast. He does not a daf a day, an almond a day, but there was built-in chazaras, there was bein hazmanim, so maybe you learn 80 daf a year. Daf yomi you learn 4 times that amount, 4.5 times that amount. So it's a big difference. And if you did his pace, you would finish once every 25 years. Here you can finish in 7 years, which is a big difference, a really big difference. And I think in order to become someone who's successful in Torah, that's the plan that you have to have. And I wish a lot of yeshivas would implement this plan. And if you're not going to implement the plan, then go listen to me, Ben Sion Lang. Search it on YouTube, and you'll see all the shiurim I give. There was a young guy, 18-year-old guy, who came to my mother-in-law's house, and he was looking into yeshivas here in Israel, a gap year program. He was not serious about Torah. I told him, you don't have to go to yeshiva and here in Israel. I said, go ahead, go to college, and listen for an hour at night to my shiurim. And in 1 hour, you can get all 6 of my shiurim, basically that. 20 minutes of the daf yomi, 8 minutes for the Ian on the daf yomi. That's, let's say, a half an hour. The Shulchan Aruch yomi depends how long the simon is. The average is at 10 minutes. The Ian shares 5 minutes, 15 minutes. The Mishnah Yomi and the Ian are also, between 10 and 15 minutes. In 1 hour, you could have 6 shiurim, plus the background of showing you through every single simon, through every single daf, through every single Mishnah, a pair of Mishnayos, an Ian shiur. So you get the Ian, learning how to learn Ian, and you get covering tremendous amount of ground, not just in the Gemara, but also in the Shulchan Aruch, and also in the Mishnayos. And when you go through that cycle, you'll have an unbelievable kinyan, an unbelievable acquisition of the entire Talmud and the entire halachas. Not only is halacha will be primal in your life, we give primacy to halacha, but also the Gemara will fit into the halacha, and you'll know everything. You'll have a background in everything. Now, not everyone remembers everything, but like I said, if you give primacy to halacha, the Gemara turns into halacha, which is very important. And the Ian Shir I'm going to be giving going forward are going to be a lot more halacha based, which I believe is better for me and better for the listener also. So what I'm doing is really revolutionary. I think this is the future of learning. I wish yeshivas would implement it, because yeshivas have more time. Guys who are bachrim not married have more time to dedicate to learning. And even people in Kollel, that should be what they should be learning. It's hard to find Kollelim like that. There are certain Kollelim, at least for nights there, that have Malka Shalibo Chafetz. So at least set aside that time to learn Daf Yomi or to listen to all my shiurim in 1 hour. Of course, that means you have to get YouTube. I don't think it's available with any of the kosher filters. Maybe my shiurim would pass through the filters, some of them. They should pass. I don't know how the filters work exactly. But I think it's really imperative of people to cover a lot of ground, to go through all these things. And that's really what your direction should be in Kollel, for everyone. In yeshiva and Kollel, I wish all the yeshivas would adopt my system. If you don't want to listen to my shiurim, at least let the other rebbeim give those shiurim. Let people listen to those shiurim and cover the entire corpus of Talmud, Mishnayos, and the Shulchan Aruch. The Gemara says that Ein adam lomed al makom shel libo chafetz. That's the source of libo chafetz. A person only learns from the place where his heart so desires. And people think that's a directive. The Torah is telling you the way to learn Torah the best is to learn what your heart desires. But I think it's really more, it's different. The Gemara is telling you a reality. The Torah tells you, that's naturally happens to people. They go after their emotions. Whatever they like at that present moment. They're into Hilchos Basar B'Chav, they want to get smicha. You don't go with your heart in emotion in Torah. You always go with your intellect. Never go with your heart. I mentioned before Shavuos, I said the first letter of the Torah is Beis. The last letter in the Torah is Lamed. If you spell it backwards, that's Lev. People who go backwards in Torah, do the opposite of the Torah, they use their Lev, their emotion. People who wanted to follow the Torah and learn the Torah correctly, they go in the opposite direction, they use their intellect. And then you end up like me, like the Baal, Ben Sion Lang, Beis Lamed. That's the initials of my name, Ben Sion Lang. The correct order, Bereshis until Einei Kol Yisrael. So it's very important to have the perspective, not to go with your emotions. The Torah is telling you people will go with their emotions. That's wrong. The Torah is pointing out it's wrong. You have to go with your intellect. Makes sense. You have to learn the halachas, learn Mishnayos, and then learn the Gemara, learn the analytics, but apply it back to halacha. And that should be the curriculum for all Kollelim. I don't think Kollelim should learn fast. They should learn halacha. And you have to realize that people don't have infinite amount of time to learn, especially as you get older. and your family grows and the expenses grow and your time is restricted, it's important the younger you are to cover as much of this ground as possible and to get involved in Torah, because the Torah you learn in your later years was always going to be based on the foundations that you had in your younger years. And if you had great foundations in your younger years of learning the entire corpus of Shulchan Aruch, of Mishnayos, of Gemara, and certainly Mikra also. We learned in Mishnayos yesterday that people, the Gemara says in Kedushin, you have to Mishalish Limudo, Shlish Mikra, Shlish Mishnah, Shlish Gemara. And really the foundation is, we saw from the Mishnah yesterday in Maseches Yuma, that really you're supposed to learn Tanakh first. That's the foundation. Learn Tanakh, not just Cham Lisha Chum Sheitar, but also Nach. And then you learn Mishnayos, and then that's the correct order. And then Mishnayos, and then Dorei, Shivra Chacham. Then you can be Dorei. Then you can engage in Pilpul, then you can engage in analytical reasoning and things like that. But only after you have a strong foundation in the Tanakh and a strong foundation in Mishnayos, and Mishnayos is also the Halachas L'maisa. Then you can learn the Gemara, because then the Gemara won't be a chore where you're an intellectual exercise where it's not related to reality. It has to always come back to reality. The whole point of the Torah is to Mekayim the Torah, is to fulfill the Torah. The Torah and mitzvos, the only way you can do that properly is having a balanced Seder of learning Mikra, Mishnah, and Gemara, but also learning the entire scope of it in a short amount of time, because even though you'll tell me you're learning very fast, but 7 years is a long time in a person's life. To complete all that in 7 years, you've accomplished a lot. It's very fast, but so you'll do another cycle of 7 years. At least this way you'll know everything, because people who only know part of the story, they can't reason on anything because they don't know the entire story. That's what I like to say the correct answer to this question is. I think people in Kollels should have direct focus on this, and I think it really goes back to the organizers of the yeshivas and the Kollel to adopt a system like this. Even if you don't want to listen to me on YouTube, you feel that my stuff is not relevant to you, I don't give good enough shir, or the stories I say and the references I make are not yeshivish enough for you. But the truth is, it's not true at all. If you listen to my content for long enough, you'd realize how great what I say is in such a short amount of time with such clarity and such innovation. And you realize also it's important to know what goes on in the world. Derech Eretz Kadmon LaTorah. That's an aspect I'm not going to touch upon today, is that besides the fact that you know all the Gemaras, you also have to know about the world. Because if you don't know about the world, you can't learn the Torah properly. The Torah is encased in the world. It's based in the world. And if you don't know what things that are going on in the world, you can't learn the halachas properly. The halachas don't make any sense to you if you're not sure what's going on in the world, if you don't understand what's going on in the world. That's a topic for a different time. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. See you in the next one.